Welcome back to another episode of Theo's Thoughts, and today we are going to be going over what I've read in February. If you listen to the last read review from January, I only read 4 or 5 books. February, I read a few more, to say the least. I started a series, got very much sucked into it, as you'll see, but we'll go through each book, the good, the bad, what you kind of get from it, and what I learned. The first book of February, which I think isn't a stranger to book talk, is A Court of Thorn and Roses. I have seen this book everywhere. I've seen people talking about it so much, and I just had to see what all the fuss was about. So I started with this one, and I wasn't a massive fan. It's pretty much like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It was interesting, don't get me wrong. So it's a kind of romantasy. You've got fairies, magic, riddles, trials. There's a sort of enemies to lovers trope. In fact, sort of 2 enemies to lovers trope. You've got forced proximity. You've got this kind of captor and captive. You've got an evil queen. There's a lot that reminds you of the fairy tales that you hear about when you're younger, but it's more of an adult version. And it's fun. It's interesting. But I found the first 2/3 kind of boring, kind of predictable. Again, I don't know if this is BookTok's fault for spoiling a lot of it, but it just didn't feel that interesting and that engaging. I can say that I started to enjoy it during Rhysand's introduction, when you know who you're going to be rooting for in this series. I enjoyed the world building. The last 100 pages of the book, perfect. Really great pace, really great storytelling. It felt original, it felt new. I enjoyed diving into like the area of the world which was under the mountain as such. Everything while Freya was in Tamlin's court was just a bit boring. It was predictable. It just wasn't that engaging to me, and it feels like an introductory book, which it is in a way, but it shouldn't feel like that, I don't think. I enjoyed Lucian and Freya sort of building this relationship and friendship with each other, even though they don't really like each other. It's kind of nice, sort of a love-hate relationship. Under the Mountain, really enjoy Rhys's interactions with Freya. Obviously there are spoilers in this, so I apologise, but there's the bargain and then the tattooing and then also painting, and it's interesting in how you sort of love and hate it at the same time, and how Sarah J. Maas has incorporated certain things to actually make you like the character, even though you know you're not supposed to, but you also know you are kind of supposed to, because this is going to be the main love interest. I really enjoyed the riddle scene. A lot of people found it predictable. I didn't. I'm not very good at riddles. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the revelation. I didn't like Tamlin. He wasn't charismatic. I felt like I should have fallen in love with him a little bit, and I just didn't. It was boring and bland. The plot was kind of slow for the first half for my liking. It didn't engage with me at all. And I know that it is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but it felt like it. It didn't feel original enough to say, oh, it's kind of a take on it. It just felt kind of like Beauty and the Beast and a little bit too on the nose. In the first sort of, I would say even 3/4, so it's not really the first bit, it's the majority of the book, I didn't feel a real connection to the main character. And I also felt like her family was just a little bit too much. I don't know. It was a good book. I read it quickly, which is why I can say it's a good book, because the ones that aren't that engaging at all, you struggle to get through. It doesn't matter if it's 200 pages, it can take forever. So for this one, I gave it a 7 out of 10. The second book that I read in February was Assistant to the Villain, so again, kind of romantasy, but this was more of a romantic comedy. You've got your sunshine versus grumpy kind of trope, slow burn romance. You got mythical creatures, magic, and obviously Assistant to the Villain indicates morally grey hero, right? You got your main guy who's actually the villain, but you're following his story and rooting for him. It was interesting to read a fantasy book that was a little bit more like a rom-com. It made me chuckle in a few places. I liked learning more about the villain, and I like this sort of understanding different sides to people, I guess. I liked the connection through sort of bad moments that the two characters connect with. There's kind of a softness from the villain because he's in love, right? That's, again, kind of cute. Really loved the sidekick character of the frog, Kingsley. That character was a perfect addition. It's like a Disney movie where you have the little sidekick and then he ends up being the favourite, or you've got Despicable Me and you've got the Minions. Kingsley is like that for this book. I enjoyed the slow burn romance. I enjoyed the ending, sort of. So again, big spoiler, I enjoy who she becomes at the end, and I enjoyed the plot twist with the villain's enemy and the king. It was kind of good revelation. But what I didn't enjoy was the pace of the book. Found it kind of boring. Wasn't much of a plot. Yes, you follow the villain. Yes, he's sort of going against the king. You know that it's a rom-com, and yes, it's a slow burn romance, but there is no real payoff to it. That's the most unsatisfying thing for me, where there's not really much of a story that you're following. The story that you are following, there isn't really a conclusion to. So it just kind of ends. It wasn't it for me, so that reason I gave it 5 out of 10. Made me laugh in some places. Interesting take on the romantasy genre, but it just wasn't for me. Next book of February, to no surprise, would be A Court of Mist and Fury. I understand the hype. I get why people love this book. I love this book. It's the second book in the series, so you've got your romantasy, enemies to lovers, fated mates. There's a big theme of independence in this and making your own choices. Love that. Absolutely love that, and I feel like that's so relevant to so many of us. There's the themes of sort of strength in true love, and it's not like the true love kiss kind of thing. It's what true love actually means. You've got a war and political theme emerging a lot stronger than in the first book. You've got this sort of family trust theme, beauty and darkness, the freedom to choose what real love is, again, versus what is obsession and being possessive, theme of betrayal. But for me, my personal sort of interest in this also was this idea of agoraphobia. There's something I struggle with myself, and it was nice to see it portrayed in such an elegant way, but also the real fear of being trapped. There's a moment where Freya is trapped, or potentially going to be trapped again, and the fear is that she's not going to be able to escape. Even though she sort of knows she is, that is almost stopping her from doing the things that she sort of needs to do in order to achieve certain goals. That's something I think a lot of us who deal with anxiety can relate with. Loved that for the book. I really did. I loved the different topics of that. And again, love, trust, betrayal, all of those themes, which although it's a fantasy book, are so applicable in our real lives. And it's nice to see how these characters deal with it in a fictional world, and actually it helps us understand what we would like in a real situation. Pretty much everything I have written down is just different likes. Love Freya and Rhys's increased trust and playfulness. I caught myself smiling so many times at the banter they have between each other. There's a good payoff of learning why Rhys did certain things that he did in the first book. I like that Tamlin made an appearance, that he wasn't just a redundant character from the first book, that there is still relevance to him. Love the family bonds in the Night Court, that really your friends can be your family more than your actual family is. Love the different character introductions. It's really difficult in the fantasy series, I think, to introduce characters in a way that's not overwhelming, that you don't forget who's who. And Sarah did this fantastically. You feel like you get to know everybody. You feel like you're meeting them. It's not just suddenly this character, this character, this character, this character, and you just can't even remember who's who. Everybody has their very clear and distinct role in this story. And if they are a lesser character, you then get reminded every so often of who they are in relation to and why you know them. Surprisingly, really enjoyed the politics of it and the sort of betrayal. I like that the sisters, Freya's sisters, were brought back into the story, that it wasn't just she abandoned them. And for me, absolutely loved seeing the vulnerability and the strength of Rhys as a character. So often you see men written in a way that's just not realistic. Don't get me wrong, he's not that realistic. He has wings. But it's nice to see that his personality is similar to a real person. Yes, he is, I think, High Lord of the Night Court. I think that's how it's worded. He's meant to be the biggest, baddest guy out of a number of High Lords. Yet he actually has his vulnerabilities. He has things he struggles with. He struggles with certain just decisions. It's great. I think it's nice to have these moments of down-to-earth sort of conversations and acknowledgements, even though it's a fantasy book. The only thing I didn't like is just that it wasn't the complete story. You have to go on to book 3 to sort of see what happens. So, for that reason, it is a 9 out of 10, which it surprised me. Next book that I read was You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight. The next book that I'm working on is a sort of murder mystery thriller, epistolary novella. So I'm trying to read a lot of books to do with murder and to see how it's written, to see how other people make revelations, and just get to know the genre a little bit better. This is a YA story, like a horror slasher, but aimed at a younger audience. You've got a diverse cast. There's the sort of secret murder history. It's set at a summer camp. You've got your teenage camp leaders. We know how that goes in slasher stories. And it's kind of like cult vibes and that. So it is your typical horror slasher story. I enjoyed reading about the friendships. I enjoyed that it was sort of like a normal slasher story. There were a lot of clues in the second half, and there's that sort of misdirect introduction. So the first chapter it's as if you're already starting the horror story, but it's actually not, and it's nice. It allows you to dive straight into the story without actually too much happening for you to wrap your head around. You get to understand the setting in a really, really interesting way. I like the epilogue, where the point of view changes to the actual final girl, because the whole thing is the main character that you follow is known as Final Girl. That's her role in the summer camp. Unfortunately, I thought this book was going to head into a certain direction because it's YA fiction, and I thought it was actually going to be cleverly done. But it is just a typical slasher, and there were some things that really just didn't sit well with me. The first being the Owl Society. It's supposed to be a cult. It's supposed to be really terrifying, and they're called the Owl Society. I just couldn't take it seriously. I just couldn't. I was like, oh, I see what's going on here. But no, I didn't. There was the actual cult and people dressing up as owls killing people. So yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of that. There were a lot of murders that are mentioned in the book. Again, it just seemed not really plausible. I know it's a slasher type thing, but it feels like it's trying to be really realistic, and in doing so there are certain things that then just contradict it. I don't know, it just doesn't sit well with me. There's also no real depth to the characters. You only really get to know the main character, kind of, but not really. I could tell you what the characters look like, couldn't tell you much about their personality, couldn't tell you what matters to them. They're just there as characters. They're just there to fill out the book, I guess. It's quite depressing as well. I always try to look for positives in what I read and see what I can take away from it and what shapes my thoughts and values and that kind of thing. This just didn't. It wasn't impactful. It didn't leave me shocked. It just irked me a little bit. For that reason, I gave it a 5 out of 10. Next book, new release, Bride by Ali Hazelwood. So excited about this because it's her first supernatural sort of romance thing. I mean, she's written The Love Hypothesis, Love on the Brain, those kinds of things. This is her sort of supernatural one. Very exciting. Read it in a day. Safe to say, it was over a weekend. Vampire versus werewolves. If you grew up reading Twilight, then this one is probably for you. You've got the marriage of convenience trope, family issues, misfits, fated mates, interesting in Vampire versus Werewolves. Grumpy versus Quirky as opposed to Sunshine. Like, he's very serious, she's very not serious. And then you've got politics and fractured society, which again is interesting. It's two species versus each other, and they have to live in peace somehow, and always someone's trying to overthrow somebody else's control. It's alright. I like the plot. I like the pace. So you've got the idea of a mate, and the reason that I like this is because you've got two different species. It's funny to me because I feel like maybe she's trying to say that you don't have to be the same in order to be mates, to be compatible. And I just don't know if I'm thinking too much into it, but I liked it in this book, actually. It was quite funny. I like the opposing species, the whole vampire versus werewolf thing. That's something that I've grown up enjoying, and as an adult I enjoyed stuff like Blade. I liked that the female character Misery, she never really fit in anywhere into any species group. Loved that. I think a lot of us have felt like that in normal life. It's a sort of slow burn romance in a way, but you've got hints to the reader of Lo's behaviour. There are a few intimate moments where their personalities really connect, where it's not so much about this marriage of convenience, but where they actually get to know each other. Love that. There's a big plot twist at the end. I didn't see it coming. I don't know whether that just means I was too immersed in the story, whether I'm just not that smart. Took me by surprise. Loved it. Loved that it wasn't just another redundant character. I really enjoyed the fact that Misery's relationship with her brother just goes from strength to strength and ends on a real good high. Really enjoyed that because I was expecting it to go a different way. I thought it would be a lot of family rivalry, and it's not actually. They look out for each other, which is great. I mean, I'm a stickler for romance, and I just love that there's this undeniable force pulling two people together, regardless of what they think they know about the world, that they're just two people that are meant for each other. Love that. And that's in this book. At the start of each chapter as well, because it's all from Misery's point of view. There's little snippets from Lo's point of view at the start of each chapter, and I love that because it gives you an insight into actually how he is feeling. There are a couple of things I didn't love about it. I found it really jarring when the word species is thrown around a lot. It just starts to feel a little bit dehumanizing, which I get because, they're not humans. You've got vampires and werewolves, but when you keep referring to somebody you love as like, oh, he's a different species, it's like, okay, yeah, I get what you're saying, but I don't know, it didn't sit well with me. There are a few moments generally in the book that feel kind of awkward, but not like they're not meant to feel awkward, they just read a bit awkwardly to me. I struggled with Misery being naive to certain things. I mean, she's supposed to, I don't know, she's supposed to understand things, and it just, I don't know, it felt like in order to achieve certain plot points, she had to be a little bit naive rather than actually who she was, because she comes across as really smart most of the time, so then when she's really naive, it just, I don't know, doesn't seem right. At the very end, there's also a conflict as Lo pushes Misery away suddenly. It feels really sudden, and it just feels like that unnecessary conflict to hit certain plot points. Like you need that moment. They can't just be happy 2/3 of the way through the book or 3/4 of the way through the book. There has to be another point of conflict, and the author chose to make it that Lo pushes Misery away for no real reason, or the same reason of protection. I don't know, it was a bit annoying for me. Overall, really enjoyed it though. Really enjoyed thinking about how we treat other people and how we make divisions in society. And it was just a fun read, generally speaking. So 7 out of 10 from me. Next book, trying to step away from the fantasy for a little bit, decided to read The Spanish Love Deception. Obviously, I've read a few of Eleanor Armas's other books. Never read The Spanish Love Deception, but decided might as well give it a go. I enjoyed her others. And this one is typical Grumpy versus Sunshine, fake dating, co-workers, different cultures mixing. There's a big theme of trust that is mentioned so many times, but it's also true. You have people that struggle to trust other people, and then you have other people who have never done anything to really make another person distrust them, and it's an interesting theme, and it's mentioned a lot, sometimes a little bit too much, but it is interesting. There's a lot of misunderstandings, which, if that sort of trope annoys you, this will probably annoy you. There's a lot of misunderstandings. And it also hits the trope of he fell first. What I enjoyed about this book, okay, because it's like a typical slow burn romance, fake romance kind of book. There's not that much I can say about the plot, but really enjoyed Aaron's patience in this. That was an interesting thing, because there were moments that he was just being treated so poorly that you think he would just walk away, but no, he knew what he wanted and he was patient for it. I enjoyed the progression from professional to intimate, so they work together, right? Sometimes romance books just move way too quick, and it's just not, it feels uncomfortable. But there is a point in this story where the professionalism is equally as important, even though they're developing feelings for each other. I love that the author gives loads of clues to how Aaron's feeling with his facial expressions and tone of voice. She articulates herself really well in making it clear how the other character is feeling, even though the point of view you're reading from isn't picking up on what that means as such. I kind of like that, because it's like, it's kind of obvious, but it's not too obvious. It's just a nice mix that you know what's going on, but it's understandable that the character doesn't. On the theme of trust, it's nice that when Aaron is promising to be there, he really means to be there, and just keeps proving a point of he can be trusted. Dislikes. It was a little bit long-winded. There's a lot of thoughts as opposed to plot. That gets a little bit annoying. The more you're reading it, it just feels like a diary, and not a lot happens, and then that gets annoying, because like, okay, I get what you're thinking, and you're trying to make us think that you don't know that he likes you, but he does like you, and we know he likes you, so there's only so much thinking about that is interesting. The rest just feels a bit repetitive for me. I know I can be a bit of a drama queen, but I would have liked a little bit more Daniel drama. Daniel is the main character's ex, who causes all this like issue with trust. I needed more. I needed there to be something really severe with that, and there just wasn't. So again, it's just a bit of a disappointment with that. So overall, 6 out of 10. Enjoyable read. Didn't really change how I view anything. Didn't leave a lasting impression on me. Back to the fantasy for the next book, which is A Court of Wings and Ruin, which is the third book of ACOTAR series. And it's kind of the end of the trilogy, like the original trilogy. There's a lot more politics in this one. There's a full-on war, which is sort of usual in fantasy. You've got your romance, true love, bonds, themes of sort of sacrifice for the people that you love. There's a lot of creatures and bargains. I enjoyed that. I really did. You've got the good versus evil theme. Again, that's kind of a running thing in fantasy. Living unified and peacefully, that's the main goal. That's what the good guys are striving for. And this theme of dreamers, people that are always thinking about making a better world. Love that theme. I enjoyed the battle scenes in this, which surprised me. They weren't too long-winded. They weren't too detailed. Because sometimes I struggle when there are fight scenes that are just so detailed, it takes away from the pace of the scene itself. I loved the introductions of new creatures like Braxis. Loved that. Absolutely loved that, because you're kind of scared, I guess, but you're interested and you want to find out more, and it just changes the dynamic of this war. I enjoyed Tamlin's reappearance again, and that his character is pretty consistent. It didn't feel like the author was toying with his personality to suit whatever plot she wanted. His character has felt consistent throughout. He's bratty, he's beastly, he's kind of charming, he's sort of not capable but is capable. He's pretty consistent of not really being a good guy, not really being a bad guy. There's a plot twist with Jurian, I think you say, I'm not sure. Loved that, didn't see that coming. Very pleased with how she wrote that, and above all, loved that it was a happy ending. Was so worried that it was going to be so depressing, and it wasn't. It was great. I didn't enjoy the sister storylines in this because it felt forced a little bit. So Nesta and Elaine, there's a lot more about them in this. It felt forced because it felt like it was a continuation of the series. Like, oh, we need to add a little bit more so that we can write a book later on. In this one, there's a lot of names. The thing that I really liked about the previous one was that you got to know people. This one, I lost it. I didn't know who was who. I didn't know what was going on. There were so many High Lords, wives, princes. I lost it completely. I didn't like the Mor and Azriel storyline. Not a fan. Again, felt a little bit forced, felt a little bit sad. Just, I don't know. Like, felt like teenage drama. And these are supposed to be creatures that are like 100 years old. Also found it really difficult that some of the most powerful creatures ended up dying. That just felt contradictory. Like, they died so quickly. So quickly. And it's like, but these are supposed to be the most terrifying characters. So for that one was an 8 out of 10. Next one, The Last Letter by Rebecca Yarros. So I read Fourth Wing, that was the first book of hers that I read. Then I started delving into some of her older work. This now being one of them. I was terrified of this one. I've seen that people don't love it. I've seen it's kind of depressing. It's a military romance, big theme of grief. Like, really big theme of grief. You got your small town romance, single mom, but she's young. There's a few themes of like forgiveness, fate. You've also got pen pals in there, which obviously the last letter. So there's a few letters in there, which is nice. The main character, she's got twins. And there's a big theme of twins really being connected, like soulfully connected, that they know what's going on with each other. Love that. Found family as opposed to actual family. The main male character, he had a bad normal family, but then his found family really meant everything to him and changed the course of his life. You've got the best friend's brother trope, which some people like, but then there's also the heavy theme of cancer, which runs throughout the entire book. I really love the theme of trust. Again, she's learning to trust again. She's learning how to put her trust in people and what it means and what level and how you're willing to gain trust over a period of time. The idea of falling in love through words, that they fell in love through writing letters to each other. I love that because it's really, again, personalities connecting as opposed to just physical attraction. I enjoyed that they were accepting of each other's pasts, because that's often a point of contention in many relationships, is you struggle to accept who people were in the past. People change, people grow, circumstances change. It's accepting who people were and how it led them to be who they are today. On the theme of trust, there's like proving loyalty. That was really nice to read. Yeah, so the main male character, Beckett, his whole past was that he couldn't settle down and he could never see himself settling down. But you get to follow from his point of view that he is learning to settle down. And it's difficult, but he knows what he wants and he'll try. And it's enjoyable to read. There's also the idea of loving after losing somebody. That's really important because the main female character loses her brother, Beckett loses his best friend. Ella loses her brother, Beckett loses his best friend, and they're still able to love. They have to work through that grief. There's also a plot twist at the end, which was the one that I spent a long time researching and spoiled for myself because I needed to know what I was getting into, and I can see why people are upset. But it's an important point for us learning to make time count. It's that we accept everything is connected, everything leads to certain things, but you should also make the most of the time that you have. The only thing I didn't like, it was quite sad. But it's important, I think, sometimes to read books that make you think and make you feel and make you evaluate your own life, and this one does that. You think you know where this is going and you don't. And you learn to apply certain principles to your own life of valuing each and every person and not just thinking you know how things are going to go. It's kind of a slow start for a book, but it's okay. And the only other dislike I have is that Beckett reveals a secret and Ella's quite mean. Like, really quite mean after and for quite a long time afterwards, and that's I don't know, a little bit unfortunate. But generally, I enjoyed thinking, feeling. I enjoyed the book. It was an easy read and a good story, an impactful story. So 7 out of 10. The final one for February, we're back to ACOTAR, and it was the novella A Court of Frost and Starlight. It's like a holiday novella version. It's after the war. You get to revisit all the different characters, learn a little bit more, and the main sort of theme again is grief and healing. It was nice revisiting the characters after that sort of real intense battle scene. It's nice to see or to read about the characters trying to build a better world, that they're still working on that. It leaves room for a future in that world. And there's still the playfulness, the banter between friends, which is always enjoyable to read. My biggest issue with it was really that there's just not much of a plot. Most of it's just Nesta being moody, and there's just, I don't know, not much happens. And I struggled with that. I was like, I don't really know what I'm reading anymore. It doesn't, I don't know, I just didn't really feel anything. You've got multiple POVs, which is fine, but again, a little bit jarring because the previous 3 books, which are hundreds of pages, you're all from Frere's point of view, and now we're just getting a little bit of Cassian, getting a little bit of Nesta suddenly in this novella, which is supposed to be lighthearted, and there's a lot of different feelings, a lot of different viewpoints. It's just a little bit jarring. There's a lot of negativity with Lucien, Tamlin. It just wasn't an enjoyable book for me to read, aside from the fact that I already really, really, really like the characters and the world that's been built. So for that reason, it is a 5 out of 10. But that's it. Those are the books that I read in February. Enjoyable, yes. A lot of fantasy. We'll see what March brings. But I noticed that the ones that hit me the hardest were the ones to do with grief and trust. What that says about where I'm at the moment in my life, I'm not sure, but it's nice to be able to read something relatable, but still fictional, to not be stuck always learning something. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Theo's Thoughts, and hopefully you'll join me next time.